There is one question that almost every man in an age gap relationship asks himself, but very few will ever say out loud. Is this real? Or am I just borrowing happiness that doesn't truly belong to me? Maybe you smile when you're together. Maybe she laughs at your jokes, reaches for your hand, looks at you in a way that makes the noise in your head disappear for a while. But then, when you're alone, a quiet voice starts whispering. What if one day she realizes she deserves someone younger? What if people are right? What if this only feels special because it's different? If those thoughts have ever crossed your mind, stay with me. And if this conversation speaks to something you've carried in silence for a long time, consider subscribing. Not because you owe me anything, but because sometimes hearing the truth from someone who isn't judging you can make you feel a little less alone. I've spent years listening to people talk about love, not the polished version they post online, the version that shows up after midnight, the version that comes with shaking hands, unfinished sentences, and eyes that keep looking at the floor because saying the truth out loud feels almost impossible. One thing I've learned is this: people rarely suffer because of the age difference itself. They suffer because of the stories attached to it. The human mind is incredibly vulnerable to outside judgment. It doesn't simply hear criticism, it slowly begins to repeat it in its own voice. And that's where many relationships begin to lose themselves. I've sat across from men who were deeply loved by younger women, yet every compliment felt suspicious to them. When she said, "I miss you," they secretly wondered if she was only being polite. When she introduced them proudly to her friends, they searched everyone's faces for signs of hidden embarrassment. When she looked happy, they looked for proof that happiness couldn't possibly last. Do you see what happened? The relationship wasn't creating the pain, fear was. Fear has a strange habit. It doesn't knock loudly. It moves into your thoughts quietly. It starts borrowing your own voice until you can't tell the difference between reality and insecurity. Eventually, you begin reacting to things that never actually happened. She takes longer to answer one message. Your heart immediately fills in the missing story. She's losing interest. She wants a weekend with her friends. She's comparing me to someone younger. She seems distracted after work. Something has changed. None of these conclusions come from evidence. They come from old wounds looking for confirmation. And once that cycle begins, something heartbreaking happens. You stop enjoying the relationship you're actually living, because you're constantly preparing for the one you're afraid is coming. I wish more people understood this. Age gap relationships don't fail simply because of numbers. Healthy ones survive because two emotionally mature people refuse to let fear become the third person in the relationship. Unhealthy ones often collapse because anxiety slowly replaces trust. Not overnight, little by little, like water wearing down stone. I've noticed something fascinating over the years. Whenever people criticize an age gap couple, they almost always focus on appearances first. They ask how it looks, what strangers think, what family might say, whether friends approve. Very few people ask the question that actually matters. How do these two people make each other feel when no one else is watching? Because that's where love either grows or quietly dies. The world only sees photographs. Psychology pays attention to moments. The silence after an argument, the comfort during uncertainty, the way someone reaches for your hand without thinking, the way they protect your dignity when you're vulnerable. Those moments reveal far more about the future of a relationship than birthdays ever will. So before you let anyone convince you that a relationship can be measured by age alone, there's something much more important to examine. There are 3 signs that quietly reveal whether your relationship is standing on something real, or whether it's being held together by hope, attraction, and fear. The first one surprises almost everyone, because it has almost nothing to do with romance and everything to do with emotional safety. Emotional safety is one of those things people almost never talk about, because you can't hold it in your hands. You can't post it on social media. You can't measure it with compliments or expensive gifts. But when it's missing, you feel it every single day. I remember sitting with a man who was in his late 50s. The woman he loved was nearly 20 years younger. Before he even started telling me about her, he apologized. That caught my attention. He hadn't done anything wrong. Yet the first thing he said was, "I know how this sounds." Not, "I love her." Not, "She's amazing." His first instinct was to defend the relationship before describing it. Do you know what that told me? He wasn't fighting against other people's opinions anymore. He had started fighting against his own. As he spoke, something became painfully clear. Whenever they were alone, he felt peaceful. Whenever they stepped into the world together, he became someone else. He watched every glance, every smile, every stranger. If someone looked at them for 2 seconds too long, his shoulders tightened. If someone whispered nearby, he assumed they were talking about them. By the end of every dinner, every walk, every vacation, he was exhausted. Not because of the relationship, because he never stopped scanning for danger. Our brains are remarkable in one very frustrating way. When we've been judged before, we begin expecting judgment everywhere. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a heightened sensitivity to social threat. It's like your mind installs an invisible alarm system. The problem is, that alarm doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. It rings anyway. And when it rings often enough, you stop asking whether it's true. You simply believe it. Now let me ask you something. When you're with her, do you feel like you have to perform? Do you feel pressure to constantly prove you're interesting enough, energetic enough, successful enough, attractive enough? Or can you simply exist? Can you sit beside her in complete silence without wondering if she's getting bored? Can you admit you're having a difficult day without fearing she'll suddenly see you as weak? Can you laugh at yourself without worrying that she'll lose respect? Those questions matter far more than the number of years between you, because emotional safety is the place where real intimacy begins. Think about children for a moment. A child learns best when they feel safe. Adults aren't any different. We love best when we feel emotionally safe. Without that safety, every conversation becomes a test. Every disagreement feels like the beginning of the end. Every misunderstanding becomes evidence that the relationship is falling apart. I've seen couples with almost identical ages who never felt emotionally safe with each other. They walked on eggshells every day. Every sentence had to be carefully measured. Every opinion was filtered. Every disagreement turned into a competition. On paper, they looked like the perfect match. In reality, they were emotionally lonely. Then I've met couples with 20-year age differences who could disagree, laugh, apologize, and reconnect within minutes. Why? Because neither person was trying to win. They were trying to understand. That's a completely different relationship. Here's something many men don't realize. A younger woman who truly feels emotionally secure with you doesn't expect perfection. She expects honesty. If you're pretending to be someone you're not because you're terrified she'll leave, she's not getting to know you. She's getting to know the version of you that's always trying to earn approval. And that's exhausting for both of you. Sooner or later, masks become too heavy to wear. The strongest relationships aren't built on impressive performances. They're built on moments that are almost invisible. The way she listens instead of interrupting. The way you admit when you're wrong without feeling humiliated. The way both of you can say, "That hurt me," without turning the conversation into a battle. That's emotional safety. And here's why I call it the first sign your relationship may truly be meant to last. Because attraction can bring two people together. Chemistry can make the first months unforgettable. Shared excitement can carry you through the beginning. But emotional safety, that's what makes two people want to stay after the excitement becomes ordinary. When life gets stressful, when work becomes overwhelming, when family problems appear, when health changes, when the world outside becomes noisy, you stop asking, "Who excites me the most?" You start asking a much deeper question. Who feels like home when everything else feels uncertain? If your relationship is beginning to answer that question, then you've already found something many people spend their entire lives searching for. And yet, there's another sign that's even harder to fake. Because unlike attraction, it reveals itself only after both people stop trying to impress each other and start showing who they really are. There comes a moment in every relationship when the performance ends. It doesn't happen with an argument. It doesn't happen because someone falls out of love. It happens quietly. One morning, one of you wakes up too tired to pretend. The polished version of yourself, the one that always had the perfect words, the perfect smile, the endless patience, begins to fade. And strangely enough, that is where the truth finally begins. I've watched this happen more times than I can count. At first, two people are captivated by each other. Every conversation feels exciting, every date has a little electricity. They both want to be seen in the best possible light. That's normal. We all want to make a good impression. But impressions don't build lasting relationships. Character does. One man once told me something I'll never forget. He said, "She fell in love with me while I was trying to be impressive. I knew she truly loved me the day I stopped trying." There was something beautiful about that sentence. Not because he became careless, but because he became honest. He no longer felt the need to hide the parts of himself he thought were too ordinary. He admitted when he felt anxious. He admitted when work overwhelmed him. He admitted when he didn't have all the answers. Instead of pulling away, she leaned closer. That wasn't weakness. That was trust meeting trust. This is the second sign that an age gap relationship may be built on something real. You gradually stop performing because neither of you feels the need to earn love every single day. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly monitor yourself, wondering if you sound old, wondering if your clothes make you look older than her, wondering if your interests seem outdated, wondering if every wrinkle, every grey hair, every passing year is quietly changing the way she sees you. That kind of thinking steals your presence. Instead of experiencing the relationship, you're evaluating yourself inside it. And people can feel that, not because you're older, because you're absent. Your body is sitting beside her, but your mind is somewhere else, trying to predict rejection before it happens. Here's something many people misunderstand about confidence. Confidence isn't believing you'll never be rejected. Confidence is no longer shaping your entire identity around avoiding rejection. There's a world of difference. A relationship becomes healthier when both people stop asking, "How do I keep this person from leaving?" and begin asking, "How do I continue showing up as the most honest version of myself?" Those are completely different lives. I remember another couple who came to see me after months of unnecessary tension. He believed she wanted him to act younger. She believed he was hiding parts of himself because he didn't trust her. Neither assumption was true. He started forcing himself to enjoy activities he secretly disliked. He laughed at jokes he didn't understand. He pretended to have endless energy when he was simply tired. Meanwhile, she wasn't asking for any of that. She kept saying the same thing in different words. "I just want the real you." How many relationships suffer because people respond to imagined expectations instead of real conversations? Far too many. Sometimes we become actors in stories that no one else is directing. And that's heartbreaking, because authenticity has a quiet power. When you're genuine, the other person finally knows who they're choosing. Not your image, not your resume, not your age. You, the real you, with your strengths, your imperfections, your habits, your fears, your sense of humor, your quiet moments, your complicated history. That kind of honesty creates something attraction alone never can. It creates emotional certainty. Not certainty that life will always be easy, not certainty that you'll never disagree, but certainty that you're building something with a real person instead of a carefully edited version of one. Ironically, this is where many age gap couples become stronger than people expect. Why? Because if they've already faced outside opinions together, if they've already had difficult conversations, if they've already chosen each other despite assumptions from others, they're often forced to develop a level of honesty that many couples never reach. They learn that pretending isn't sustainable. Only truth is. And when two people begin choosing each other after the masks have fallen, when affection remains even after ordinary days replace exciting ones, when respect grows instead of shrinking, something remarkable starts happening. The relationship stops feeling like a gamble. It begins to feel like a partnership. But there is one final sign. In my experience, it is the rarest of all, because it has nothing to do with chemistry, age, attraction, or even compatibility. It answers one simple question that quietly determines whether two people can keep walking in the same direction, years from now. The third sign doesn't reveal itself during romantic weekends. It doesn't appear in candlelit dinners, long kisses, or the excitement of planning your next trip together. Life has a funny way of making those moments easy. The real test comes on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day no one posts about. You're both tired. Work has been demanding. Maybe one of you is carrying stress that has nothing to do with the relationship. The house is quiet. Dinner is simple. Neither of you has much energy left. And yet, somehow you still choose kindness over distance. That may not sound dramatic, but psychologically, it's one of the strongest predictors of whether love keeps growing. Because love isn't only measured by how passionately two people come together, it's measured by how gently they stay connected when life isn't giving them much to work with. I've noticed that people often confuse excitement with compatibility. Excitement is loud. Compatibility is quiet. Excitement says, "I can't stop thinking about you." Compatibility says, "Even after a difficult day, I still feel better when you're here." Those are very different experiences. One fades naturally, the other deepens with time. I once worked with a couple who had an 18-year age difference. People constantly questioned them. Friends warned them. Some family members quietly assumed it wouldn't last. Years later, when I asked them what kept them together, they didn't mention passion. They didn't mention attraction. They smiled at each other for a second before the woman answered, "We make each other's life lighter." Such a simple sentence, but it stayed with me. Because that's what healthy love often looks like. Not dramatic, not perfect, just lighter. Think about your own relationship for a moment. When something good happens, who is the first person you want to tell? And when something painful happens, who makes the weight feel easier to carry? If the answer is the same person, don't overlook what that means. Our minds naturally move toward places where we feel emotionally understood. It's almost instinctive. When someone consistently becomes your safe place, not because they're perfect, but because they're present, you begin building a different kind of bond, one that isn't shaken every time life becomes difficult. This doesn't mean you never argue. Healthy couples disagree. Healthy couples misunderstand each other. Healthy couples get frustrated. The difference is what happens afterward. Do you both become teammates again? Or do you become opponents trying to prove who's right? I've often told people that conflict doesn't reveal the weakness of a relationship. It reveals its habits. Some couples have the habit of protecting each other's dignity even while they're upset. Others have the habit of protecting their own pride at any cost. Those habits quietly shape the future. And here's something especially important in an age gap relationship. There will always be things you experience differently. Different childhood memories, different music, different cultural references, different stages of life. Those differences don't have to become walls. Sometimes they become bridges, if both people stay curious. I've watched younger partners introduce older partners to new experiences with genuine excitement. I've watched older partners offer calm, perspective, and emotional steadiness during difficult seasons. Neither person was trying to change the other. They were expanding each other's world. That's a beautiful thing. But it only happens when respect is stronger than ego. Because respect says, "I don't need you to become more like me before I value who you already are." Imagine how different relationships would feel if more people lived by that sentence. Instead of constantly asking, "Who should change?" they would ask, "How can we understand each other better?" That small shift changes everything. It turns disagreements into conversations, differences into curiosity, fear into connection. And over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The relationship stops being defined by the gap in your ages. It starts being defined by the way you treat each other every single day. That's the part outsiders rarely see. They notice birthdays. You notice bedtime conversations. They notice photographs. You notice quiet acts of care. They notice appearances. You notice consistency. And consistency is where trust quietly grows. Because at the end of the day, lasting love isn't built by one unforgettable moment. It's built by hundreds of ordinary moments where two people keep choosing each other, even when no one is watching. Still, there's one uncomfortable truth that many men don't realize until much later. Even if your relationship has all three signs, there is one person who can still quietly destroy it, and surprisingly, It isn't the people who doubt your relationship from the outside. The person most likely to damage a healthy relationship may be the man staring back at you in the mirror. I don't say that to blame you. I say it because I've seen how quietly it happens. Not through betrayal, not through cruelty, but through fear that slowly changes the way a man behaves until the relationship no longer feels like the place where he once felt at peace. Fear is patient. It doesn't rush in all at once. It settles into small moments. You hesitate before speaking because you're worried you'll sound too serious. You avoid sharing something that's bothering you because you don't want to seem too emotional. You apologize for things that don't require an apology. You begin asking questions that aren't really questions. Are you sure you still want this? You'd probably be happier with someone your own age. I know I'm not what you expected. Listen carefully to those words. They sound humble, but underneath them is something much heavier. They're quiet invitations for the other person to reassure you over and over again. At first, she may gladly do it. She tells you she loves you. She reminds you why she chose you. She reaches for your hand. She tries to calm the fear you can't quite explain. But after a while, something changes. Not because she loves you less, because no amount of reassurance can silence a belief that you keep feeding yourself. Imagine trying to fill a bucket with water while there's a hole in the bottom. You can pour more and more into it, but the bucket never stays full. That's what insecurity feels like inside a relationship. The problem isn't the amount of love being offered. The problem is the belief that says, no matter how much she gives me, one day it won't be enough. And once that belief takes hold, you begin seeing life through it. She compliments you. You think she's just being nice. She makes plans for next year. You wonder if she's only saying what you want to hear. She introduces you proudly to someone important in her life. Instead of feeling grateful, you start looking for hidden signs that she might be embarrassed. Do you see how exhausting that becomes? Not only for you, for her. Because eventually she starts feeling like she's in a relationship with your fears instead of with you. One conversation from years ago still echoes in my mind. A woman looked at her partner with tears in her eyes and quietly said, "I can't compete with the version of myself you've already imagined leaving." That sentence stopped the room. Because she was right. She wasn't fighting another man. She wasn't fighting distance. She wasn't fighting a lack of love. She was fighting a future that existed only inside his imagination. How do you win against something that isn't real? You can't. That's why trust is so precious. Trust isn't pretending nothing bad could ever happen. It's deciding not to punish today's relationship for tomorrow's possibilities. None of us knows the future. Not you, not me, not anyone. Every relationship carries uncertainty. A couple born in the same year can drift apart. A couple separated by 20 years can spend decades building a peaceful life together. The calendar has never been a guarantee. Character is far more reliable than numbers. Ask yourself something difficult. When she chooses you, do you actually let yourself receive that choice? Or do you keep questioning it? There is a profound difference. Receiving love requires vulnerability. Questioning love endlessly often becomes a form of self-protection. If you convince yourself that she'll eventually leave, you think the pain will hurt less when it happens. But that's the cruel trick fear plays. It asks you to experience tomorrow's heartbreak today, over and over and over again. Meanwhile, the relationship that's happening right now waits patiently for your attention. It waits while your mind argues with shadows. It waits while you're busy defending yourself against endings that haven't arrived. The healthiest men I've met weren't fearless. They simply learned something essential. Love cannot grow where every moment is treated like a final goodbye. At some point, you have to stop interrogating happiness. You have to let yourself sit beside someone who has freely chosen you and believe them when their actions match their words. Because love was never meant to feel like a courtroom where every smile becomes evidence and every silence becomes suspicion. It was meant to become the one place where both people could finally put their armor down. And when that happens, something beautiful begins to replace fear. Not certainty, something even stronger. A quiet confidence that says, whatever the world thinks about us, we know what we've built together. That is the foundation many people spend years searching for without ever realizing what it looks like. I want to leave you with one thought, not as a psychologist, not as someone who has listened to countless stories, but simply as one human being speaking to another. The world has a habit of reducing relationships to things that are easy to measure: age, income, appearance, status. People love numbers because numbers feel certain, but the heart has never worked that way. I've seen couples who looked perfect from the outside and felt completely alone once the front door closed behind them. I've also seen couples who made no sense to anyone else, yet somehow created a life filled with quiet laughter, mutual respect, and the kind of peace that can't be photographed. That's why I always become a little cautious when someone asks me, "So, is an age gap relationship meant to be?" I don't think that's the first question. The first question is much simpler. When you're with this person, who do you become? Do you become smaller? Do you spend your days trying to earn a place you've already been given? Do you constantly edit your words, your personality, your dreams, because you're afraid the truth won't be enough? Or do you slowly become more honest, more relaxed, more present, more yourself? Because real love doesn't ask you to disappear, it gives you room to exist, and that's a rare gift. Think back to the beginning of this conversation. Remember those fears? What if she changes her mind? What if people are right? What if this isn't meant to last? Those questions may never disappear completely. We're human. Our minds naturally search for certainty. But here's something I've learned. The strongest relationships aren't built by people who have no doubts. They're built by people who refuse to let doubt become the loudest voice in the room. They keep choosing trust, not blindly, not foolishly, but deliberately. Again and again and again. If your relationship has the 3 signs we've talked about, if you feel emotionally safe with each other, if neither of you has to wear a mask to deserve love, if your lives become lighter because you're walking through them together instead of pulling against one another, then don't let strangers define something they've never lived. Their opinions end where your daily reality begins. Of course, no relationship is guaranteed, not one. Love has never come with a lifetime warranty. It asks for honesty, patience, respect, the willingness to repair instead of retreat. And those qualities have nothing to do with the year printed on either of your birth certificates. One day, years from now, very few people will remember the comments they made about your relationship. They'll forget the jokes, the raised eyebrows, the unsolicited advice. But you'll remember something else. The ordinary mornings, the conversations that lasted long after midnight, the hand that reached for yours when life became difficult, the feeling of being understood without having to explain every part of yourself. Those are the memories that quietly shape a life, not public approval, not assumptions, just 2 people deciding over and over again that kindness is more important than ego, that curiosity is stronger than judgment, and that love is measured less by age than by the way 2 hearts continue showing up for each other. So, if you're still wondering whether your relationship is meant to be, perhaps stop looking at the calendar for your answer. Instead, look at the life you're creating together. Look at how conflicts end. Look at how silence feels. Look at whether you both leave each conversation feeling more understood instead of more alone. Those moments will tell you far more than any number ever could. And maybe that's the quiet truth you've been searching for all along. Not that love ignores age, but that lasting love asks a much deeper question. When everything else fades, do we still choose each other? If the answer keeps showing up in your everyday actions, not just your words, then you're already holding something incredibly valuable. Take care of it. Because relationships built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect don't just survive the opinions of the world. They become one of the safest places either person has ever known.